Okay, so chapter 8 starts the very next morning, and remember from the end of chapter 7, you had Gatsby staying by Daisy's house, hoping she'll come down, Nick deciding to go home, and Nick explains he doesn't sleep well all night. He's worried about Gatsby, what's going to happen. He keeps hearing this foghorn over the Long Island Sound that's like this ominous type sound, so he doesn't sleep. So at about 5 in the morning, he hears a taxi pull up, gets dressed quickly, goes downstairs, and it's Gatsby. And Nick is curious, like, okay, what happened? Did Daisy come down and talk? And Gatsby goes, no, she didn't. He goes, at one point she came to the window, saw me, like, closed the blind, shut off the light, and that was it. So for Nick, this is like, okay, it's over. Daisy doesn't want anything to do with him. But I don't think Gatsby's quite there yet. He still maybe is holding out hope for something that might happen here eventually. So what they do is they start going inside. And Nick explains that the house is way different than it really was the first few months he's known Gatsby. It is dark, it's kind of empty, it seems lifeless. I mean, if we're thinking symbolically, the house represents his dream. I mean, the dream seems to be over. So Nick sits down and Gatsby starts talking. And it's a really important section of the book. It's about 2 or 3 pages where basically Gatsby just spills his guts. And he explains about his parents and being poor, going to college and meeting Dan Cody and all the stuff that we as a reader found out in chapter 6, he talks about here. So Nick kind of just sits and listens. And then Gatsby gets into this part of his life where he meets Daisy and how she was so high class. Her family was so wealthy, and he just felt so special when he was with her. And he liked that feeling of kind of making it. So he even explains, like he admits, it's not just about Daisy. It is everything that kind of comes with that too. So he's not just in love with her, he's in love with like this whole idea of being a part of the high class in America. And Nick is listening, and it's kind of this tragic tale of this poor kid who is just trying to better himself. So Gatsby keeps explaining this, and then he talks about how maybe Tom and Daisy don't have a future, and I think he's trying to justify to make himself feel better. And Nick is just, without saying anything, he's kind of doubting it. And I've read this book so many times, and it was one line from this section that I never understood till a little bit ago. Gatsby says a really strange thing. He says, maybe Tom and Daisy are in love, but it's just personal. And even Nick in the book says, I don't know what he meant. Now, if you would research, there's a very famous philosopher, the guy's name was Plato. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. He had a theory on love. And his theory was that everybody on earth loves everybody in their life on a different level. So, I would love all of you guys personally, like acquaintances. And that's what Gatsby's inferring. Like, maybe Daisy meant love in a different way. And he's like, of course, like she loves me deeper. So I think he's grasping at straws, and I think Nick doesn't quite get it, but, we get the sense this is probably not going to happen. So finally, Nick gets kind of the courage to just say, listen, why don't you just go out of town for a while, go to Toronto or Atlantic City or Montreal or whatever, and like get out of here. And I think this is Nick's way to probably save Gatsby. First of all, his emotions, but second of all, what just happened the night before? You had this murder, basically, involving his car, and he's going to be wanted here. So Nick is like trying to say, get out of town. And his response is so perfect. Gatsby just goes, now, like Daisy will be calling any second, and she'll want to get together again. And that just kind of epitomizes Gatsby's character. And I think Nick realizes it's pointless to even say anything, and he just lets it go. I think Gatsby at this point, he's too obsessed to ever kind of recover. So it's like mid-morning, and Nick realizes he has to work. So he says to Gatsby, listen, I gotta go. I'll call you later. And Gatsby even says, why don't you stay? But Nick says, no, I can't. Like, I'll call you at noon, but I gotta go. Okay, so again, this is one of those sections of the book that you gotta pay attention to. But Nick starts leaving, and it's a very famous scene. He says goodbye to Gatsby, and his famous quote is, "They're a rotten crowd. You're worth a whole damn bunch put together." And this is Nick's way to say, I don't care what Tom says about you. You're not inferior to them. You're better than them. Like, you have more character than Tom. And Nick was like, I was so glad I said that. And Gatsby smiled. Okay, so they wave goodbye. Kind of a fitting parallel here. The first time we see Gatsby with Nick, it's on the stairs and he's smiling. Chapter 8, the same thing. And this time Nick's saying goodbye. Okay, so Nick goes to work. Gatsby gets in the pool, and that's like the first half of chapter 8. Then we flash to the Valley of Ashes, and it's that same morning. And Wilson is there, still distraught, of course, his wife just got killed, and he's with Michaelis, his neighbor. And Michaelis tries to console him. He's trying to make him feel better, and Wilson just is not even listening. He's so beside himself. And Michaelis is begging him, why don't you call a church? Why don't you go to church? Why don't you find someone to talk to? And Wilson just, is not even really listening to what Michaelis is saying. So Wilson goes to the window and he looks outside. And of course he sees the billboard with the eyes of God. And Wilson has this epiphany. And he turns to Michaelis and he says, I know exactly what's going on here. Whoever Myrtle was sleeping with probably killed her. They're probably tied together. Maybe they found out that I knew or whatever, but he's like, I have a feeling that the two are mixed. And Michaelis is even like, just relax, like, don't rush to anything. And well, again, Wilson's not having it. So then all of a sudden, Wilson starts thinking about the previous day. And then he thinks of the yellow car. And he remembers, of course, Tom was in the yellow car earlier in the day. And then the yellow car hit Myrtle. And then Tom randomly shows up after. So immediately, Wilson's like, it's Tom. I'm going to see him. So Wilson grabs his stuff, walks outside, and starts walking towards Tom Buchanan's house, whatever, miles away in East Egg. So he starts walking. Goes to the Buchanan's house. By this point, it's like noon. He gets there. Of course, Tom and him have a quick conversation. It's more of an illusion in the book. But they basically talk, and of course Tom denies it. He says, wasn't me. I was driving the car earlier, but it's not mine. And of course, Wilson says, well, whose is it? And he goes, it's a guy named Gatsby. Tells him where he lives, and says, I think something ought to be done about a criminal like that. So now all of a sudden, Tom Buchanan, perfect chance to, absolve himself from any crime. And now Wilson's sole thought is, I gotta find Gatsby. So all of a sudden, Gatsby is pinned with this affair and killing Myrtle, when we as the reader know he did neither. So Wilson starts walking towards West Egg, trying to find Gatsby, and Tom Buchanan at this point feels like he's safe. Okay, now, this next section is all intertwined. Okay, so it's an important section to understand here at the end of chapter 8. You have Nick, who's at work. You have Gatsby, who has decided to take a swim in his pool. And you have Wilson walking to Gatsby's house. Wilson gets to Gatsby's, looks in the garage, sees a yellow car, sees that it's wrecked. Of course, that confirms Gatsby did it. Wilson starts walking to the backyard. Okay, meanwhile, you have Gatsby in the pool. Nick, like he said, decides to call Gatsby, so he's calling him. As chapter 8 ends, you have Gatsby's in the pool. The phone starts ringing. What does Gatsby think? Gatsby's assuming, yes, Daisy's calling me. I knew she would. His last thought is that hopeful, okay, this is my chance again. But we know it's probably really just Nick. Okay, but the phone's ringing. Gatsby starts to kind of get up. You have Wilson coming from behind, shoots Gatsby in the pool. Gatsby's killed instantly. Wilson takes a few steps, realizes the mistake he just made, kills himself, commits suicide, in the backyard of Gatsby's, so they're both dead. Meanwhile, the phone keeps ringing, and Nick's wondering what's going on. Okay, now, if you look at the last section, it's important symbolically to understand what Fitzgerald's just done. I mean, of course, emotionally, we hate to see Gatsby die, a wrongful death. But really, what is Fitzgerald telling us here? I mean, this whole story is a story of the American class system. Someone who is poor, the lower classes, trying to achieve the American dream, no matter what. And at the end of the day, it's not happening. It almost seems impossible that Gatsby can't get there. So at the end of the day, you have the two lower class people in Gatsby and Wilson who are basically, suffering and sacrificed because of the mistakes that the upper class people like Tom have made. That's Fitzgerald's ultimate statement here at the end of chapter 8. Kind of the upper class in America is untouchable. You can never achieve that no matter what you do. And at the end of the day, look what happens. Okay, so of course, chapter 8 is not the best ending for us as the reader, but I think it's a fitting ending considering the theme of the novel. Again, we are not done yet. We have chapter 9, still an important chapter. We have to find out what happens with Nick, what's going to happen with Tom. Do we see Daisy again? And what's Nick's ultimate ending here at the end of the book? Okay, chapter 9 is next.